I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. This is our regular board meeting, May 9th, 2019. Catherine, can I have roll call?
Yes,
Do we have
sir,
lights? Do we have all the lights on?
Solar, yeah.
It's Mellows.
Right.
We turned it low so that the screen could be easily seen.
We're going to keep it dim for the presentation, so let's go with roll call. Catherine?
Okay, Trustee Baldini,
Here.
Trustee Baker. Here. Trustee Rios,
Here.
Trustee Segura,
Here.
Trustee Dodd, Trustee Goff, Trustee Kawaja,
Here.
Trustee Segura.
Oh, here again.
Oh, did I already do you? And Trustee Iverson.
All board members are present. At this point, I'm going to ask to adopt the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous. And we're going to jump right into our special report this evening with AJ and Ann Volz on our housing feasibility study. So, Ann, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for having us back. As Kyle just mentioned, my name is Ann Volz with the Scion Group, and of course, I'm here with my colleague, AJ Yoon. And we're here tonight, we'll do a quick reminder of what we talked about at the last board meeting, but also talk more. We've advanced our analysis. Several of you have even been engaged. I see some familiar faces here, and really testing some rents. But I also want to make sure, too, that we express to you what a public-private partnership, if you do go that route, that entails. So as we said last time, too, we have an agenda, we have a PowerPoint, but feel free to stop us at any time to make sure we answer your questions. So I do want to make sure, too, that we acknowledge is everyone that I see in this room and everyone that we've worked with has very demanding schedules to run a very well-run college. But everyone has been so accessible for us, has provided all the information we've needed in a timely manner. And that's what lets us stand up here with extreme confidence, too, because this is a study that's focused on your college, your students, and thanks to everyone here, and then certainly the extended family at Napa Valley College. So, just a brief reminder of ourselves is Scion only focuses in on campus housing. So I just want to make sure you're aware we are not a developer. We are objective third-party advisors, and there are times, too, when we have to share with our clients that housing is not feasible for them. So that is our sole mission, is to provide our clients with the most objectable advice from market feasibility all the way through even ongoing management. And I'm going to turn it over to AJ.
Good afternoon. I'd like to recap a little bit about what we discussed last month. So as Ann said, we're not a developer. We're here to really give you objective recommendation about campus housing and where you are now and what could be your options for the future. We use very engaged process. In 3 words, we can describe that we use a collaborative process, engaged, so that we can be objective advisor for you. To briefly explain, before that, in our process, engaged process, we met with your campus leadership and identify what are your objectives in this campus housing. And we learned that you want affordable quality housing, promoting engaged and diverse population, enhancing campus engagement, and support your recruitment and retention of students, faculty, and staff. And last but not least, extend campus's integration with the community. With these in mind, we have, as you can see in the objectives, we're looking at recruiting and retention expectation from campus housing on this community. That 80% of student population told us that campus housing will be important in recruiting and retention of students. And 60% of faculty and staff believe workforce housing is important in attracting and retaining qualified faculty and staff. In campus housing, has benefits of promoting faculty, staff, community engagement. It can increase more involvement in campus activities, faculty-student interaction, and opportunities to strengthen relationships with the community. We discussed last month too, but there are benefits from campus housing. Those are not from SCIEM, but it's from national research, that students in campus housing demonstrate higher persistence and retention rates. Average GPAs are higher, graduation rates could be higher, levels of academic and social engagement can be higher. And there are many other several points of benefits of campus housing. Napa Valley College is not the first community college in the nation in California to consider campus housing. Over a quarter of the nation's community colleges already are providing campus housing, and in California, already 11 community colleges are offering student housing, and 12th one, which is Orange Coast College, broke ground last fall, and that's the photo of their ceremony. So particularly in this area, we're looking at the issue of a high cost of local housing. As we all know, California is not an expensive state to live, and there are not many affordable choices in this area either. When we say the healthy vacancy rate is 5%, in Napa, it is 1%. And more than half of renters in Napa are spending over 30% of their income for housing, and 23% are spending more than 50%. So the question is, if we build one, will we be able to make sure that it is filled up? From our study on campus and qualitative and quantitative studies that we conducted, we determined that there is sufficient demand for student housing and housing for faculty and staff. One thing to point out from the survey result is that out of 314 part-time students, 41% told us that they are willing to take more classes and stay on campus more if there were campus housing. And also for the survey, we want to point out that we had the target. We selected the representative target for our surveys, and this is following the industry standard and science 20 years of experience and expertise in the industry. So from our study, we recognize that there's no typical Napa Valley College student. That's why we tested a variety of floor plans and making sure that we're addressing different needs of different and diverse students. We're not talking about old school dorms that you might easily can picture when we went to school. We're talking about quality, affordable housing. So for the site for the campus housing, the school identifies some options for us to consider, and what we heard is north part of the campus, close to the neighbor retail, but also because of we're looking at the student and the faculty housing, staff housing, we are recommending to consider some separation between two types because it's not a good idea to put the two different cohort groups together. So the school told us that two sites are identified, the north part of it, close to the neighbor retail, or the west part of the campus. So now we see that there is significant demand. There are questions about the next step. How can we finance it? some of the questions that we hear is, will taxpayer pay for it? Will there be financial responsibility going to taxpayers? How much will this cost to the college? What are the risks of this project? And who's going to take the control? How much the college can control this project? And what are our options out there? And Anne will explain the options and the considerations for the school.
So you really, to state at a high level, you have really three different options that you could look at. Of course, we've had a lot of conversations that have led up to this point. But of course, there's the typical college-owned traditional, that would be a bond. That puts all the risk, all the financial burden on the college, of course, all the control. There is the not-for-profit, which is also known, of course, in our world as the public-private partnership. And that is really in between. That is where the college can maintain the most control, but also minimizes that risk, too. It does not burden, and I'll explain a little bit more, it is not community taxpayer funded. The last one, too, is, of course, you could just sell off a piece of land or say, here you go, developer, just do some housing for us. In that scenario, you actually have, obviously, no control. You have no risk, but you have no control over the student experience as well. You have no control over mission, risk, etc. It works for some schools. All three of these work in certain situations. So, and again, it's really obviously balancing that control of risk. And there's just a little list where we put about 8 up here that should be about 50 of considerations that you will need to make. And you're also going to need to make these, and we'll walk through a little bit more, even through a P3 tax-exempt financing structure. So I'm really going to, the next few slides are really going to focus on the public-private partnership because that is the most common delivery method from all of our conversations that we've had from the very first meeting that was, gosh, back before the holidays, have always been, we certainly want to minimize all types of risk. The college cannot pay for this. That was made very clear to us in every conversation. We responded to a request for proposal document. It was clear in there, so we've always heard, if this is going to burden our community tax dollars, this is not a project right now for us. So therefore, but yet, we also heard that mission is very important to us. Our student experience is very important to us. So therefore, it obviously leads to the P3 as being the most appropriate delivery for your college right now. What does that mean? Is that literally is, there's a partnership word in here, and you are partnering with a private entity that will also bring in your owner. So I hope I can explain this pretty clearly. So all of the risk financially in this project sits in exactly what's called project. And that's just the definition. I'm not talking about affordable housing project, but we'll call it that for the sake of this. All the financing goes through your not-for-profit owner. That is usually a nationally set up foundation, and there are 3 I know of in the country that are set up purposefully to own P3 student housing. So until the debt has all been repaid, that's your owner. That who owns the housing on your campus. All the bonds float through a 501c3 that is not affiliated with the college or the community. Of course, what's very important, and it's important anywhere, is your property management firm, too. So that is really a 3 to 5 year agreement. You could use, a lot of our national developers have that in-house, but that is an agreement that the not-for-profit entity would hold for 3 to 5 years, but you're in a partnership, so the college gets to be a part. You're on the board of this not-for-profit, so you get to have a vote. Who's going to manage my property? How are we going to control mission? What is that experience? What are those outcomes? If there's revenue generated from this project, at the end, it is the college's discretion where those funds be allocated. The developer needs to make a certain rate of return, and it's fixed. So you don't have a private entity coming in and partnering with you that is looking to make money every way they can. They need to make their required rate of return, of course, because they have bondholders that they've committed this to. But anything beyond that goes directly back to the college for use however you may choose. And then, of course, is once the debt just is all repaid, just almost like we would be with our own homes, the college would own the housing. So there are, and the bondholders will make the whole project do this too. So just so you know, you don't get back really poor housing that they just let run down for the last 10 years. You have to have a reserve fund that is put in, and it's put in per bed per year. And it's usually between $150 to $200 per bed. That is to ensure the college as well that the project on your campus will be maintained to a quality level throughout the duration of the ground lease, and you are given back a property that has been continually improved and deferred maintenance has been taken care of. So this chart is, I don't expect you to read the little boxes because I can't even read them from here, but the box in the blue that is where that 501c3 sits. That is your project owner. Of course, your developer is taking on all the risk in the construction and whatnot. I'll get a little more into a pre-development agreement, but they're hiring your architect, your construction manager, all the trades, of course, all the engineers too. But the main point is the blue box is where all the risk, and that's where all the financing floats through. So there's going to be, and we do this a lot of times in an interactive session, is you're going to want to control your experience. Back in the early 2000s, the not-for-profit was just fantastic. It didn't hit any debt capacity or whatnot, and Moody's really came out with a paper, gosh, I think it was 2005 or 2006, that said, we know that most institutions are not going to let a building shutter on their campus. So there is some either positive or negative credit impact, and how closely we tie ourselves to the housing is how much it affects that credit impact. So those could be, you might want to handle all the marketing. If you have the site right in the center of campus, well, then the rating agencies know for sure you're not going to shutter a building center of campus. So there's a whole list, and I've got a few on here, but we're not at this place now to determine an X, but it probably won't sit right in the center where I have it here. And this is a list that I obviously got it from Moody's at one point, but this is, I remember abbreviating it one time with our team in-house, and just certain factors that once you've selected your P3 developer and you're really working through the negotiations is when these become very important. Okay. So let's just talk a little bit more specifically. That was just kind of a broad brush, of course, but, and this is where we've advanced our analysis a bit too from last month, just to make sure too, if you do work with your development partner in all these negotiations we spoke about, and if we're your advisor too, is all of these factors that we've analyzed from a financial perspective are intended to make the college a very informed and a very empowered owner throughout all these negotiation processes. It's a partnership. We're all trying to do what's right for the college together. But this helps a little bit in what we should be asking for and maybe what we need to consider otherwise. You saw these from last month. They haven't changed, of course. And what we ran our numbers on was the 60%. So here we did 373 beds. So everything you see is based on that number. And just so you saw too, the different rents that we ran on the right-hand side. And we did look to ensure again, and I know that I was asked even last month to make sure, and I agree with that, that these are less than market rate. And then with faculty and staff too, is we did 55 beds. I'll go a little bit further into that. With the student housing financial analysis, is we tested 2 different programs. We tested a lot more, but this is at a high level. And the one on the left, where we have traditional / apartments, is you may recall from last month too, and from our report, is that there's such a diverse student body here, that there was such a diversity in desired unit types, all the way from, gosh, we would just love to have a mattress here in Napa, or also too, as you have students that said they would really like to have an apartment style living. So we ran a program that had a mix of both, and then we also ran an apartment style housing. And just a quick slide, I'm not going to walk through this, but we did look back to at our off-campus market analysis, and just to really make sure that, A, look at the survey rents that we've tested, but also to make sure that, as we heard from strategic objectives, this is to be affordable quality housing. I promise you I will not read this slide, but just so you have it too, is that, of course, we really have to look at our key assumptions. These are based on your college, our estimates of what we think a hard cost construction would be. It's a little bit less, as you can see, or it's a little bit more for hard cost than even what Santa Rosa said in their last board meeting. So, but we base it on what we know from your area, from our research, from outreach to different trades here in the market. And then obviously too, we use it on our analysis, our 20 years of experience for vacancy rates, et cetera. So the key point here really is when you see the bottom chart and you see what's called a debt service coverage ratio, that is that developer's required rate of return. That's the contingency. They're not going to just finance your project just based on it's going to break even. There's got to be some room in there if something happens, if its occupancy falls to an 85 or whatnot, that quite honestly the college isn't at risk unless it falls below 1. But the developers to be interested in working with you want to see a 1.2. That is a underwriter's 1.2. You're going to hear it all 50 states. So with the traditional apartments, if we do the mix of units from our financial analysis, and we did get some input from the college, is you're there with your 1.2. I mean, we're at a 1.19, 1.15 in the first years, but you've got a very strong project. The apartment style on its own and keeping market rates real low are much more challenged. So based upon this, we think the developer should probably consider doing a mix of traditional. Again, once we work with our developer, that's when we work through the program, work through the financing. So these are really to inform negotiations. And this slide, so this is getting it a little bit more into the weeds, is the closer you have financial accessibility and you have financial return, and they fight each other all day long. And I know we want to keep our rents as affordable as possible. One way to do that is to use some levers as well, and that puts the college closer to the project. So that is, you can change building size, you can change building cost and level of finish to a certain part, but the more we want to achieve financial accessibility, the college is going to have to consider how closely they want to tie themselves to the project. I would not recommend that it's an outright cash contribution. We don't see that. I mean, once in a blue moon, but that's not typical. So faculty and staff, 213 units that we tested. I'm not going to go through these again. The assumptions, of course, are slightly different because these are apartments and they are geared and they're rented by the unit, not by the bed. Your vacancy is tested at a little higher because we don't have RAs in the properties. There's changes to the two. So for just a faculty family housing, you can see it's quite challenging to reach that 1.2. That's not surprising, as in any project, and at least in almost every project, as it advances through the lease, the returns do get stronger, because a lot of your debt's been repaid in the earlier years. So we also looked, too, at different levers, as we ran a pretty low market rate. Of course, rents is a lever. None of us really like to focus in on the rents, because we're trying to keep them as affordable as possible. But we did test what that took to take all the risk, or well, not all the risk, but all the tying to the project off. So there's different levers that we can work with depending on financial accessibility, return, control, risk, a myriad of factors in the negotiation process. So where could you go from here? This is up to you. This is certainly not up to me, but this was a schedule that we discussed with the college. Obviously, we're here tonight, so we're at the May 9th date. And as you can see, around June 1st is President Kraft plans to set up a housing community work group. You have your next board meeting on June 13th. As was mentioned in the last meeting, there has been a procurement process performed before we were engaged with potential developers, and there is a list. And so if you choose a developer, you would begin in what's called the pre-development agreement negotiations. Now I'm going to explain just briefly what that means. Is once you engage with the developer and you start to advance your project, they are now coming onto campus. They are starting, just think of a typical construction project anywhere. Your architects are now starting to draw. There's money that's being spent by the developer. So that is the pre-development agreement that stays in place until project financing. And the project cannot get financed until the building has gone through complete construction documents and DSA approval, because the investors need to know exactly what they're funding. So the pre-development agreement exists from time of beginning with your development team all the way through project finance. During that whole time, the developer is not receiving any monies from the project, but they are expending. I doubt there's too many architects, so there's money being spent throughout. So the pre-development agreement protects the college and it protects the developer in a whole myriad of the what-ifs. If the college decides just 6 months from now that after 6 months of design we're just not going to do the project, well, what happens? If the developer decides to walk away, what happens? If there's a force majeure, what happens? So that pre-development agreement is important. It is, obviously, we are now engaging in the project, so changing your mind, obviously, there's going to be recourse to the college. And so those negotiations do take a little bit of time. So it could be, if a selected developer is chosen in June, to give a couple months for those negotiations to bring a pre-development agreement to the board meeting in August for consideration. Again, just a potential schedule to consider. And just what can we do? I mean, it's campus housing by 2022. What's that mix of housing? What do we want to achieve from the housing? We are not here to say advance your housing or not advance your housing. We are trying to give you just all of the data that you need to make the most informed decision for your students, your faculty, and your staff. Are there any questions? Or?
I do have one speaker card. Do you guys want to discuss first, or do you want to allow for a speaker? Gary, do you want to come up and speak? this point? Or you want to wait until public comment? It's up to you. Want to jump in now, or?
Mr. Chair, honorable trustees, it's a little bit difficult to make a comment at this time because we just saw a much more refined report. I did go to the meeting yesterday. They did not provide all of this type of information. Very detailed. I have basically 3 points. First of all, when you're discussing, first of all, I think affordability, I think they hit it right on. I think this board has been pretty clear that they want affordable housing. And there's a lot of terminology that they use when they start talking about the rates. I really, really suggest you go look at the April meeting agenda for the Santa Rosa Junior College. There is a development agreement, the pre-agreement they're talking about. It's in there. It's 40-some pages long. And there's a lot of terms in there that you come up. One is the room rate, but then they also talk about a blended room rate. So how many of the, in Santa Rosa they came up with $750 per room is the lowest, but then there's a lot of others that goes all the way up to like $1,175, $1,075. And then how many of those, and it's blended, and the question is, what is the affordable? And what's the purpose going to really be? Is it going to be to, provide all sorts of housing, or is it really for the housing insecure? I would suggest the latter. The second thing is, and I've said it many times, the staff really ought to be a lot more involved with this process. And they've been eliminated from the process because it was never part of the facilities master plan. And the reason is there's a lot of indirect costs associated to the college with having students on campus 24/7, in all such things as security, health services, including mental health services, and lots of other things. For example, in Orange County, and 2 years ago, I wrote this board a letter, and I gave you when they were doing the Orange Coast College, what they came up with. And they said that for 800 beds that they were going to supply, the costs to the college are going to be about $900,000 a year in annual expenses for indirect costs to provide extra security and all those other things. So there will be costs. And that's just an indication of how much faculty and some 20-some employees are going to have to be hired. That's what the $900,000 goes for. Well, those translate into faculty and staff being engaged in what those employees are going to be doing, and all the impacts on the college campus. So faculty and staff really ought to be much more engaged in this whole process from the get-go. They haven't been, I don't think. The third thing is, I think you're getting the cart before the horse. Santa Rosa, in their plan, in their proposal that came before them in April, said they would be able to open the doors in August of 2022. That's 3 years and 4 months after they made the agreement with the proposed developer. And Santa Rosa is going to do it with a mitigated negative declaration. Here, you're going to have to do a complete EIR. No EIR has ever been done for this area that they're talking about, the north part of the campus, including the area down near the river, including known wetlands. This is going to be a lot longer than 3 years. Why you're doing a developer now on the whole wide range of things is beyond me. It'll be very, very expensive. I'm not sure those expenses have been taken into consideration in setting all these rates. So that's something you really ought to be exploring. I've said this before. I said it 2 years ago. I've been saying it every time I could say it. It's gone in one ear and out the other. But it's going to hit you. It's going to bite you in the back. So those are the 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Do I have any more in the public that want to speak on housing? Okay, open it up for board discussion. Questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is to the point of affordability, and that's true. That's what we've been talking about, affordability. And looking at the numbers and the market rents that are cited in the report, they're not that different. There's not a big difference between the market rates and what we're talking about here in this report about what the rooms might be rented for. So my question is, do you have an idea, or is there kind of what are other colleges, when they look at this, how far below market rate do they consider kind of affordable for the students? To me, it's pretty darn close to market at this point. And yes, like I said, and it was just commented, we've been talking about affordability. I don't think we've been talking about housing only for the housing insecure, but certainly affordability, and I'm not sure, I don't have a real good gauge on what that is.
Now, that's a great question, and it's obviously different in different markets. General rule of thumb, if rates aren't about 20% less than market, it's usually seen pretty much the same. I think yours are around 20%, 'cause 13 to 11, 200. That's usually what we look at. Even when we test our rents, they have to be a rent that you can actually, you have to build the project. I mean, there's debt, so there has to be a certain rent payment, of course. So we do always make sure we run and test a rent that would create at least a feasible project to protect taxpayers. So the rents we ran, I'd have to look back exactly at the numbers, but I think they're around 22% less than market. And I can even verify that too, and I'd have to pull up my computer.
I do, or I could. Okay. One is on the debt service ratio, and I think it was the blended types of traditional and apartment style housing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That you said that I guess the developer is looking for a 1.2 ratio.
Yes.
And even in this one, and I know these are not final numbers or anything, but it showed the first couple of years, the third year kind of gets into that ratio.
It's pretty typical.
Is that when the developer sees that maybe the first 2-3 years are not at that ratio, is that a problem? Or would a developer look at that and say, no, this is okay, we think this is going to work out, or is that...
You're going to have to tie it somehow with the college for those first couple of years to really get to that 1.2. And there's several different levers you could pull. One thing, and remember with that 1.2, that is really a contingency over. So your revenue is over your operating expenses by enough of a buffer that the investors feel comfortable. One lever, and it's in public documents, for example, is Orange Coast College. They have, if the project goes to a certain vacancy rate, they rent some of the beds, just a percentage, for only so many years. I mean, there's so many different levers you can pull to get to that 1.2. You're at it for 2 to 3 years with that. So there is some tying it in, and it would go back to those conditions that determine credit impact as well.
Okay, so then in those, whatever, 2-3 years, or possibly in the future, if those rents fall and the ratio goes below what the developer is looking for, the college may have to pull some lever to make some kind of contribution to keep the developer?
Well, that's all, so it would never, you'll have that all defined in your ground lease agreement. So once you have signed your pre-development agreement, you're going to go right away into your ground lease, and that determines the terms for the whole extent of the ground lease. And so it's all defined in the very beginning, so it's not going along and saying in year 10, oh, it's not operating now, all of a sudden we're at risk. It'll sit within the project. Now, you could make a decision at that time to say we'd really like to keep this housing open, but you wouldn't be required to per the ground lease agreement. You could, if I haven't seen it happen yet, but you could see a project that was not performing, and the project shuts it down, the not-for-profit would walk away. You would have an empty building on your campus, and honestly, I got asked this the other day at another community college. I haven't seen one close down. It's got to happen at some point in our lives, not here. But, so just so you know, all those terms that you're talking about are all defined in the ground lease.
And that's between the not-for-profit and the developer.
It's between the not-for-profit and the college that you'll have your ground lease, because it's your land
ground
and you're
lease.
leasing.
But the developer is going to be in contract with the not-for-profit.
The developer gets paid by the not-for-profit because that's where the money flows from. So they do have the relationship as well with the not-for-profit, but you're in the long-term relationship with your not-for-profit owner. So the college, or it might be the district, but either one, will have a ground lease agreement with a 501c3 corporation.
Right, but then does that corporation have the actual development agreement with the developer rather than the district having the development agreement with the developer?
The district has the development agreement because it's your land. So you are leasing your land to a not-for-profit. So that ground lease is not developer-owned.
But if we've
Yeah.
leased the ground
Mm-hmm.
to the not-for-profit,
Yeah.
then it belongs to the not-for-profit for those 50 years or whatever it is. So wouldn't that agreement then be between the not-for-profit and the developer?
So it's district-owned land. So the district has to lease its land to the not-for-profit.
Right.
So it would be with the district and the not-for-profit corporation. You will continue to own that land. The not-for-profit owns the improvements until the debt is defeased. So it has to be between the district and the not-for-profit is where the ground lease.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the developer contract, too, is with the not-for-profit, but that's not your long-term. I mean, that's to get you through your development period. So your long-term, your development contract will be with the not-for-profit and the developer. Your ground lease contract will be with the district and the 501c3.
Right, so what I'm getting at is,
Yeah.
I think the contract would be between the developer and the not-for-profit, but like in those first 2-3 years, if
Yes.
we're not at that 1.2 ratio, is the developer, is the college expected to kick in funds to bring that return to the developer up to that 1.2?
That could be one option, is you could choose to master lease for a couple years. A lot of colleges have done is what's called subordinate expenses. And what that does is that takes, and I'm not saying this is the one to go, but it's a common one, is you might take a percentage of your expenses on a pro forma statement, put them below the net operating income, and if the project doesn't perform even beyond that contingency that's in there, then the college would be liable to pay those expenses because the bondholders would be paid first. And that gets you to your 1.2. So you would be liable then for that expense only if the project performs, it probably need to, I don't know what the number would be, but probably need to get down to maybe an 80, 85%, maybe probably about an 80% occupancy before you've gone through your contingency as well. That has been very common because projects are challenged to get to that 1.2 in the initial years. That doesn't have to extend throughout your whole ground lease. It could be for your first 5 years, 10 years, whatever obviously makes sense for the actual transaction.
Thank you, yeah, that was what I was looking for.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate you keep asking because I want to make sure I'm giving you the right, or giving you the information you want. So thank you.
Good, thank you.
Who's next? Trustee Goff? Go.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. I keep going back to what our community member asked about the additional costs, the costs that we're going to incur simply by having students on our campus for 24 hours. Is this something that your organization has looked at in any of your dealings, or is that something that we need to do our own investigation as far as how much annually is this going to cost the college in addition just for having these students here?
So we look at it in absolutely every single project we do, especially for first-time housing. It's very significant. Even before first time I met your college, you have been doing this research, actually. So I was quite impressed with we've met with the local, not we, but all of you. So a lot of research even has been done by the school, which that's an informed college. Not all of our clients, they think, oh, that's right. So we do look, and that's why, too, there is some financial return that can be used to cover those expenses. Now, Orange Coast College had about $1 million of return a year.
After the initial years where or did they start?
Yeah, it's about $1 million in return. So what they've done, even in their project, is they're getting street improvements. So it adds up to $900 quickly. They're getting new tennis courts. So they've chosen to take that to include the extra cost of campus housing. But they had enough, too, which you don't here. You don't have 800 beds, and you're also not we didn't put the rents at those rents. But, so there is money that comes from the bottom line. And that is the college's discretion to use. And most colleges, where they put it first, is the cost, an additional cost for a 24/7 campus.
You obviously didn't work up any numbers specifically for this college as part of your contract, correct?
Right. What we do is we share, here's things that you should consider.
Okay.
So, yeah. It's usually lighting, extended student areas, focused areas. There might be some pedestrian pathways that need to be kept improved.
And I know we've discussed this, I think, at the last presentation about possibly the need for security and lighting and all of that. I would really like to see, and I'm sure the public would feel better as well, to really see what those costs could possibly be before we move forward, because I think it is intimidating. There seems to be a lot of unknown additional costs that I'm sure everyone in this room can think of something different. And I would much rather have a guesstimate and a realistic view of what those additional costs are going to be, especially when we've just had this discussion of, in the first couple of years, maybe we won't hit that number, and maybe we'll owe money on this project. Well, if we owe money and we also have additional costs, it would be really nice to be able to prepare for that and say we can handle it before we jump in. So if I can maybe suggest that for a future meeting or our September meeting, June. Sorry. I don't even know what month it is. Sorry, it's May, but I would like to suggest that.
Good questions, and I'm sure
We'll
that's
take it.
something that you guys could assist in.
Absolutely. We'll definitely we'll work with the school for that.
Piggybacking off of Trustee
Absolutely.
Goff's question, I mean, where do you typically see, I guess, a lot of the heavier costs, with those not direct costs associated with housing, but outside, like security?
It's a lot. A lot of the costs are, and you don't have quite as many, but a lot of colleges will all of a sudden extend their student union hours, or they'll open up a new dining facility. You're here, you're going to have additional security. I would think you would want some additional lighting. You might want an additional mental health counselor with extended hours, because now you have students on your campus. It's usually extended hours, so more staffing, typically lighting, and any pedestrian improvements, any connections to campus that would need to take place. And absolutely, we will certainly put together a spreadsheet on that.
Trustee Segura, you have
I'm good.
anybody from this side?
My first question is, when we originally were kind of moving this version of this project forward a couple years ago, I think, when we first did that, we were talking about primarily student housing. And we did talk about, whether or not we wanted to include faculty and staff housing. And I think at the time we decided we really wanted to focus mostly on student. So, but we've got both of these presented now. If you were looking at only doing student housing, would your recommendation or analysis be any different? Or is your recommendation contingent on having both?
So that's a great question, and we ran them absolutely separately as two standalone projects. You could bundle them into one financing package. Of course, there's a lot of economies of scale to doing that, but we ran them as two, so all the findings you found they're not codependent upon each other.
Also, over the course of that 30, 40-year lease, how much control does the college retain over decisions that would directly affect students, like rent increases or who has priority access, that sort of thing?
So you have control over, because you'll be on the board for the 501c3, so you'll have control throughout the whole duration of the ground lease. All those, what you're talking about right now, too, is when can rent increases, or how do we make sure it always maintains affordable, et cetera, will actually all need to be defined in that initial ground lease. So you will have control at all time, but you will also be on the board. So this 501c3 can't go ahead and make decisions on its own without its college partner.
You said that we had a vote on that board. Do we have a
You have majority
vote?
Yeah, you have majority vote, so yes. Good question.
And then the construction documents that you referenced that have to be in place and completed prior to financing, is the cost of that completely covered by the developer, or does the college need to put in for that? And does it include things like an EIR or would it include mitigating something that came up as a result of a report like that?
So you can put as much as you want in the project. Typically, for example, our fees are usually paid back to the college at project close. You're going to want, and I would, because we are absolutely not legal counsel, you're going to want to bring in your legal counsel or maybe someone that specializes in P3. You would track all those expenses and track all the expenses associated with CEQA with the project, and they can all be reimbursed at project close. So you can put as much as you want in the project as long as it's directly associated with the project. Just know that every expense you put to the project burdens rents too. But yes, it can all be paid with the project financing.
Yes, thanks very much for your being here this evening. Actually, three questions. Given the fact that a environmental impact report, location has been thrown around a little bit. Given an EIR hasn't been accomplished, how will that affect a critical path to get to 2020 or 2022 or 2023?
Yeah, so I do need to work with the college a little closer to know what has been done to date, but it could probably impact it about a year.
Thank you. And my next question is, you threw out a number of $315 per square foot. Is that national, or I know you have dealings now?
Here.
That's local. That's
If I was back in my Midwest friends, they would go, what? And so we're about double what we see back there. So that's here, and actually, I think Santa Rosa is around 290, 295, but we thought that might be a little conservative to put, especially seeing that construction costs keep rising every month.
The last question is, given that the site is undetermined at this point, how does the vertical go as far as size? Is construction, maintenance, and risk as you go vertical? How does that change?
You change at about, and I don't claim to be a construction person, I know enough, but if you go beyond 4 stories, it typically is when there's kind of a change with your construction cost. I think at Santa Rosa, they're doing cold form steel 5 stories. So, but if you go above that, you're starting to get into high-rise code, and the codes change so much of your construction cost. So you probably would have a building that wouldn't go over 4 stories.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other follow-up?
I have a question.
Trustee Kawaja?
We were talking about timeline, 3, 4, however much time it takes. And the finances, if we, looking at the options, we were looking at the options for finances. If we opt with one, does that change our timeline till the final project deadline? Does that change?
They are all little, I mean, if you just went and sold your land tomorrow, that'd probably be pretty quick. Obviously, if the college were to fund it, that means a bond, so that's a different timeline. So EIR is going to be the same no matter what. You're still going to have to go through DSA approval no matter what. So your timelines are pretty much the same if we're not talking about passing a bond or whatnot, which I've never heard spoken about for housing. Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, good questions, you guys, and thank you, Gary. We are going to move on.